Oh, Mary? I was reminded of an attitude, I guess you could say. The other day in a video, I briefly mentioned Ronald Reagan and felt like it needed a little explanation. During the Reagan Administration and for some time afterward, America was divided into two big groups. People who hated Ronald Reagan and people who loved Ronald Reagan. I happened to be in the first group. It was a serious time, and it's gotten more serious since. The other day, I was looking back over those years and realized that my attitude was not entirely appropriate. That I began to find reason to feel sorry for him. And the reason is this. Before the election and then after his election, first term of office, he talked about how everything would improve. His economic plan. Under his economic plan, there would be new businesses would pop up like mushrooms. And existing small businesses would grow. The corporations would grow larger and stronger. Wall Street would stabilize. And so many other things that he promised America would happen. So he came to office, and after about 2 years, the economy did improve. But it was from Jimmy Carter. When Carter put his economic stimulus plan into effect, he said that it would be 2 years into the next administration, whoever's in the White House next. That's when his economic stimulus plan would begin to be felt. And sure enough, 2 years into Reagan's administration, the economy did pick up. Now, like any, politician, and most other people, can't blame just politicians for this. He of course took credit for it. But then his economic plan started coming into effect. There were words like Reaganomics and trickle-down economics and so forth. And that's when things started falling apart. It was next to impossible to start a new business. Small businesses around the country were collapsing. People going out of business. And then there was the stock market crash during his term of office. That was more devastating than people know. It took some fancy footwork on the part of some very savvy economists to pull this country out of the hole. Otherwise, it would have been a depression that the depression of the 1930s and 40s would have paled in comparison. It was that bad. But they managed to pull it out. So there wasn't anything that he promised that came about except for one thing, and that was the growth of the corporations. But it wasn't in a way that he expected. It was mainly through mergers and hostile takeovers and such as that. And whenever there was a merger of some type, immediately a lot of people lost their jobs. So by the end of his second term, he was pretty demoralized. He tried not to show it, and his PR people were the best I'd ever seen. I mean, they really knew what they were doing to present, a very positive face on it all. But he was genuinely perplexed that it didn't work. His mentors were economists, were the heads of the multinational corporations. We call them major corporations at the time. And they told him that this was going to work, that this was going to happen if he did these things, and he did those things, and it didn't work. Exactly the opposite happened. They lied to him. And he didn't know what to do with that. You couldn't call Mr. Reagan a man of great depth. All he knew to do was stay the course, and he repeated that over and over and over again, as if he were talking to himself. Stay the course, stay the course. And during his second term, his Alzheimer's got worse, until finally his last year in office, he could no longer carry out the duties of that office as President of the United States, and his cabinet ran the country during that last year. It was very sad what happened to him personally and for the nation as a whole. You just never know. In my own life, I've seen this has happened to me a number of times, where I would take the advice of someone and take their word carte blanche, and it turned out to be very much the opposite of what I was expecting. Probably the biggest example is the TM movement. I got involved in that in the early 1970s. And what I found was not Eastern philosophy. It skirted around the edges of Eastern philosophy. Maharishi wasn't a conduit through which his master, the wisdom of his master flowed. Rather, it was exactly the opposite. He would take words of his master and turn them around exactly the opposite in meaning. And there was no freedom, but rather a conditioning techniques to be involved in the TM movement, which I was. I had planned on becoming a teacher. It was really to submit yourself to a very intense conditioning. And it took decades, literally decades, to break that conditioning. It was very well done. It was very clever. And there have been other instances where people would promise one thing, exactly the opposite would happen. This is a part of life and a part of the learning experience. And in the end, it's learning to rely on your own wisdom. What is wisdom? How do I gain wisdom? How do I act on that wisdom? It is of the self, always of the self. You'll never find it in the words of other people. And it begins first in meekness. Come into humility. And only in that a state of humility, there is a kind of a surrender. When that occurs, you know what rightness is. It takes a while getting to it, but it's worth every effort. It's coming to rightness within yourself. And it's not done through arrogance. It's done through meekness, humility, through to surrender to the truth. Well, that's enough for today.